You're watching Mountain Computers.
Hello everybody, and welcome to Mountain Computers. Today I'm taking a look at the Aorus X570 Extreme, a motherboard made by Gigabyte, which is intended primarily to be compatible with AMD's new line of Ryzen 3000 series processors. Today I'm going to be unboxing this board and taking a look at it. If you're interested in seeing it used in a system, stay tuned because I'm going to be integrating it into a build in the very near future. Yeah, today I'm going to, well, start with unboxing, so let's get right into it here. Comes in this very nice box from Aorus with some, I guess you'd call that like holographic text on the top as well as in the front here. And then if we go ahead and lift up the top here, I don't know how well it shows up, but let me get a second shot of it here. Top here it says, "Team up, fight on." It's pretty cool. And then if we look down in here at the board, they've got it covered in a kind of plastic protective layer here, which says, I guess that's not the part that says remove, but nonetheless, we will remove that plastic piece, and here we get our first looks at the board itself. So let's get it pulled out of there. Move this over. Just go ahead and pull it out of here. It's heavy, that's for sure. There's definitely some good reasons for that heft, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Alright, so what's left in the box here? I'm thinking a fair bit of stuff. So let's go ahead and pull out this top panel here. It looks like, to start with, we've got some kind of a poster. That's pretty cool. Oh, no, it's a set of stickers, so everything on here is a part of a sticker sheet, I guess. It's fairly cool, I guess. Not something that I'm really probably going to use anywhere, but I guess it's an additional thing that they were able to include. There's a piece of documentation, I'm guessing, about Aorus Fan Commander, or is this perhaps a piece of extra hardware? Let's take a look. It's definitely a box. So if we lift up the lid, this box again has that kind of holographic stuff. Alright, so let's take a look at the accessories included in the box. So to start with, we have a user's manual here, which appears to be fairly comprehensive just from a quick glance through. This whole thing is in English, and I'm sure is probably localized for wherever the board is being sent to then, but yeah, it looks like they've done a pretty good job of documenting everything that's coming along with the board here. And then there's also another piece of documentation here about their RGB Fan Commander, which I will jump right into next, I guess, which is just over here. This has this kind of brushed aluminum look to it, and I'm sure this probably lights up with an RGB color scheme, because what this thing is an addressable RGB fan controller hub. So it supports up to 8 different channels here, so you can get, I guess, up to, you probably can chain a few fans off of this. I don't actually know exactly what each of these ports is spec'd to in terms of power draw, but theoretically the total maximum should be equivalent to what SATA Power is capable of delivering, because that is the input power that is used to, power this device. There's also this USB in and motherboard sync port. Now, you don't have to hook both of these up. It's one or the other. If you're using a Gigabyte motherboard, or at least this is according to the directions, then you should use the USB in with the provided cable that is associated with that. And I believe that is this cable here. And that just connects up to USB 2.0 port number 1 on the motherboard. And if you do not have a Gigabyte motherboard, then the manual recommends that you use this motherboard sync, which is this cable, which on one end has this, I believe that's a 7x2 configuration of pins there. I'm not counting off the top of my head, but that looks to be about correct. And then on the other end has this 4-pin PWM fan switch that you should connect up to a 4-pin PWM connector on your motherboard, and that will give an indication of the appropriate speed that this fan controller hub should be trying to drive its fans at. And then 2 other connectors, one for addressable and one for non-addressable RGB, depending on which configuration that you're driving. I'm not sure if it is or is not capable of taking in one type of signal here and then converting it within the box to do the other. So you could take an addressable RGB controller and then output it onto several non-addressable fans. Not something I've tinkered with, not something I saw in the manual. You might want to look into that if that's an odd but maybe existent use case that you're trying to use this for. But yeah, if you're not using the Aorus or Gigabyte motherboards with this device, not sure how you would get a hold of it, but maybe in the future if you had another board and were trying to reuse the fan controller, this would be the cable which you should use to do so. So, other than that, on the other side here, there are 2 temperature inputs here. So included are 2 test probes that belong to this device that are responsible for measuring the temperature of the system, and I'm sure in software you can make a fan curve that configures how fast the fans off of this are going to spin based on what the temperatures of these probes are reading at. And also on this side you see there are 2 USB outputs. So that would be probably one reason why you would use the USB input on this side if you were not using a Gigabyte board with this. If you hooked this up, I imagine that would allow these 2 ports to still work. These are a USB splitter or hub, as it were, and each one of these provides a USB 2.0 speed connection. So, moving along, for the 8 different fan outputs that are on the device, this includes cables for 8 different fans to be connected. So you can see here is the end that connects to the controller hub, and then over here is a pulse width modulation ready fan controller or fan connector for pulse width modulation speed control anyway, and then each one of these underneath of these protective guards has an addressable and a non-addressable RGB connection included on it too. So those are included. There is a SATA power extension lead in case you need to use that. This is a fairly nice braided cable here. This is a device which connects up to the motherboard directly and is I imagine, piezoelectric sound pressure sensor. So this can be used to measure what the current noise output of your system is and adjust the fan speeds appropriately to help keep your system from being really loud if something's going wrong, or, I don't know. It seems like it would be at least mildly useful to me. Yeah, it is definitely nice to have it included. Here are the USB 2.0 extension leads that go out of the fan controller hub. Moving along here, this is an RGB extension cable, so you can take a 4-pin or a 3-pin, I suppose, would be capable of being hooked up through it. Light controller connection, and it just extended out to the length of the cable here. There are 2 more temperature probes that are included that can be directly connected to the motherboard. There are a set of adjustable with a few different set points of adjustability Wi-Fi antennas included in the box that connect to the back of the motherboard. There are 3 sets of 2 SATA cables included, so that's a total of 6, and they are done with these fairly nice braided cables, so those seem like they're fairly nice. There are 6 Velcro ties included as well, so that's pretty cool. You know, usually you get twist ties with the case, but Aorus has given you Velcro here. Moving down, there are some M.2 screws here. There are some other screws here which for the life of me I can't figure out the purpose of, but they might have to do, since they're in a quantity of 3, with the M.2 screws here for something particular to this board. There is a badged a sticker that you can stick onto the front of your system with the Aorus logo if you feel like you would like to do that. There is a USB flash drive, which includes the drivers. And then finally there is this front panel connector. So the idea, when you don't drop it, is that this will connect up to your different front panel connections. And then this connects to this connector, which then in turn connects to your motherboard. So you connect your front panel connections off of your case onto this. This gets inserted into this, and then this connects to the motherboard. So next, why don't we go ahead and have a look at the board itself. Let me begin this segment of the video by saying that if there is a philosophy which Gigabyte seems to have taken with the design of this board, it is probably that there are no compromises. And I would argue that for a consumer platform board at this price, that is definitely the kind of attitude that you should take. But if there is one place where Gigabyte has skimped a little bit on this, it is on the back panel I/O, and it's specifically these 4 ports here. Those are 4 USB 2.0 ports, and while that is not really a big deal for me, as many of the accessories that I'll be using are still USB 2.0 devices, for someone else who's trying to buy this board to be the end-all be-all solution for them on like a consumer platform, but at a high end of that platform, this is a little bit disappointing, I guess. But if we move along from there, you have Wi-Fi 6 compatible Wi-Fi connectors here for the antennae, and that should, you know, deliver a fairly fast Wi-Fi experience, considering that it is, as of the time of recording, the latest specification of Wi-Fi that's semi-widely available to the public. Moving on from there, there are 4 USB 3.1 ports in a figure of 4 configuration here, a 2x2 matrix. Moving up from there, there is a USB 3.0 port here, and a USB 3.0 port with the gray insert there, which is used to flash a BIOS to the system. In normal operation, it behaves just like a USB 3.0 port, but Gigabyte has a capability built into the board whereby if for some reason the board is not able to boot, either because there is not a CPU in there, I believe, or the RAM is not being configured by the system correctly and not being detected, or there's some kind of problem, you can flash a BIOS onto this board by plugging a USB drive that contains the BIOS into this port, and then by pressing this QFlash Plus button on the back of the board right here. There's also a clear CMOS button back here. I'm not a huge fan of putting a button that clears your CMOS back here, mostly because I'm afraid I'm accidentally going to hit it. Maybe it's the case that I have to hit this for a long period of time. I haven't really looked at the manual in depth yet, but the prospect of being able to erase my CMOS that quickly and that easily external to the system is a little bit bothersome to me. I would like to see this button just implemented onto the top of the board somewhere. So, yeah, moving along from there. One more USB Type-A 3.1 port here. Just below that, a USB 3.1 Type-C port. Up from here is a gigabit LAN port. I believe that's an Intel implementation. And then just to the right of that, a 10 gigabit NIC, which is integrated to the board, not on a separate riser card, obviously, as you can see. And I believe the chip manufacturer who's doing the interface for that is a Qantas. I'll put it on screen in case I'm wrong, but if we move along here, there's 5.1 channel surround sound with a line in and a line out, and the two rear speakers and the two front speakers and a subwoofer, as well as an optical audio connector SPDIF right there. Alright, let's move along to the next section then. So if we start looking at the top of the board, there's quite a bit to see here, but let's start up here in the upper left-hand corner, where there are two 8-pin EPS power connectors. Now, for a Ryzen CPU, or for the majority of Ryzen CPUs, connecting both of these is not going to be necessary. For the build which I'm doing, I will be using a 3700X, so I am foreseeing only using one of these connectors, but there are potential circumstances in the future of Ryzen where we might see CPUs get into, we already know that there's going to be 16 cores, maybe next generation we could get up to 32 cores, and in that case, this may have been a very good idea, and we'll see. It'll depend on how much power those chips draw, and, I think it was just kind of a future-proofing measure for Aorus to put that on there, not to mention that thing that I said before about no compromises. But if we move down and to the right from there, we get to the CPU socket area. There's AM3 compatibility hooks here for the AM4 mounting mechanism, and then lined all along here is a 16-phase VRM with absolutely no doubling. So these are 14 phases of vCore power plus 2 phases for SoC, and then I believe there's another 2 phases that are set aside to be used for the RAM power delivery as well over here. So there's dual channel RAM, of course, with Ryzen, so there's 2 DIMM slots per channel here. If we look in the upper right-hand corner of the board here, there is a CPU fan connector here, which is, of course, compatible with PWM control. There is a CPU opt connector right next to the CPU fan connector, which is used when you're water cooling, I guess. So this could potentially be used to power a pump, I'm guessing. The manual doesn't really specify, but I'm fairly certain that that's the intended usage. Right next to that, there are a bunch of test points here, which you can use to measure various voltages on the system. So you can, if you're doing some very extreme overclocking, you can, hook up a voltage meter here and check to make sure that the voltages across your system buses are behaving correctly. You could probably hook it up to an oscilloscope too. These aren't actual connectors, they're just solder points though, so it's kind of a downgrade from what I've heard that Gigabyte maybe used to do on their very extreme boards in the past, where you could actually have leads hooked up to these permanently that would let you always have your board hooked up to an oscilloscope if you were really doing some extreme overclocking. But I don't know, to have them there I guess is nice, probably. There are two connector points here which you can use to connect up those temperature probes that we looked at earlier. Here there are two RGB headers, one for non-addressable and one for addressable RGBs. And then also at the top of the board here is an integrated power and reset button here. If you were using this on a test bench, that might be fairly nice. It's got a pretty cool, I would say, little kind of heatsink plate built over it. I'm not sure that that's actually performing any function. It might be being used to cool the VRM for the memory. Let's go ahead and migrate over to this section of the board. There are two 7-segment LEDs here which are used to display post codes. There is a USB 3.2 Gen 2 connector here for front panel connections of the same link speed variety. And then if we move down to the lower right hand corner of the board here, there are a couple switches. One for selecting the BIOS that you're after if you want to force BIOS 2, because Gigabyte boards include 2 chips for BIOSes. Then you can force it to boot off of BIOS number 2 if you know that there's a problem with BIOS number 1, and for whatever reason the automatic failover is not working correctly. And then there's also this SB switch, which is used to force the board to manually boot off of a single BIOS as opposed to using the dual BIOS configuration. So if you wanted to force it to boot off of BIOS number 1, you could flip this up and then leave this in the down position. Force BIOS 2, you would leave this in the up position and then this in the up position. And if you wanted to have the system use its regular automatic configuration, have both of these in the down position. But then, if we come down here, we get to the real big selling point of this board, and really the reason why I bought it. So, almost every X570 motherboard has an integrated fan to cool the X570 chipset, which puts out relatively quite a bit of heat compared to previous generations. Now this board, rather than doing that, has integrated a very big, very beefy kind of heatsink here that is used to cool 3 M.2 slots, which sit here, here, and here, if I'm not mistaken, underneath of the cooling plate, but also passively cools the chipset. So there is no small fan on this board. It is, like most motherboards in the past several years, very passively cooled, and that is really the reason why I went ahead and got this board. There's also 3 PCI Express 16, physically 16 lane slots here. Electrically, these are connected as a 16, an 8, and a 4 lane connector, if I'm not mistaken. This board, of course, has integrated RGB. I believe this little plate here is lit up in RGB when the system is on. If I'm mistaken there, I apologize. But I do know that this area here becomes backlit with RGB when the system turns on. Yeah, moving on from there, why don't we take a look at some of the edge connectors that are on the board. So most of the connectors on this board are integrated as edge connectors, but I guess they decided to make a change of that for these three connectors. There is one 6-pin PCI Express connector here, which can be used to provide supplementary power for these PCI Express connections here. Those would really only maybe be necessary if you were running three-way Crossfire, or if this board supports it, and I'm not sure that it does, three-way SLI. If I'm not mistaken, you need at least 8 lanes to be able to SLI most GPUs anymore, so I don't think that that would be capable of being done, but I know Crossfire does not have that limitation, so you could maybe see that kind of power draw here, but it's, again, really trying to overbuild the board for that no compromises sort of aesthetic. Here is the front panel audio connector, and here is a trusted platform module connector. And if we go around to the side here, starting from the left, we have 2 front panel USB 3.0 connectors, or USB 3.1, I guess, as the new naming goes. Moving along from there is a USB 2.0 connector. 6 SATA 3 connectors here for, up to 6 drives, and I know that these are capable of being run in several RAID configurations. Here, behind this included blank, is the connector which you would connect that sound probe up to. Next to those are addressable and non-addressable RGB headers, the front panel I/O connector, the 24-pin power connector, and then a collection of 5 different integrated fan headers that you can use to connect up even more fans to your system. So this would be capable in total of having many, many fans connected. So I guess the only other thing to do here is to look at the back of the board real quick, and if we go ahead and turn it over here, you can see that Aorus has integrated a backplate into the design of the board. Over here they have painted on the name of the board there, and in all, it looks pretty nice from the back too, as much as most people are never going to see the back of this board. It's a nice touch, I guess, especially for enthusiasts. So Yeah, I think that's going to conclude my look at the Gigabyte Aorus X570 Extreme. If you guys enjoyed, please consider hitting that like button. And if you want to catch my next video where I should be doing a build with this board, then be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell notification button as well so that you don't miss that future video. But alright, thanks everyone for watching, and I will see you later. Bye.